I will say just a few sentences about how important I think it is what Jennifer Harris and Lee Regan and Jay Phillips and Chuck Harper do here. And I will say something about its importance. If you'll pardon the expression, I will speak to you saying how I think what Chuck and Lee and Jennifer and Jay do here, I will speak of it as a patriotic American. In the United States, it's part of the nature of our culture that we do not have relatively, we lack the two great means in which culture often is transmitted from one generation to another. One of these is a single unifying folk tradition, so that the grandmas and the grandpas pass on the poems along with the music and the stories and the jokes and the riddles and the recipes in the course of normal life in the kitchen. It's a folk process. You hear the jokes, you do the dances, you cook the cuisine, and you hear the poems. We do not have a single unifying folk tradition. The Italian-American grandma and the Russian-American grandma and the African-American grandma and the Caribbean-American grandma and grandpa and the Polish-American grandpa and grandpa, if they happen to be so fortunate as to live in physical proximity to the grandchildren, all have different folk traditions in the ways of jokes and poems and music. So relatively speaking, we don't have that single unifying folk tradition. The other source in which many cultures pass on an art like poetry is a social class, an elite, an aristocratic social class that feels that it is by heredity the curators of art, music, poetry. Snob value. There are countries in which the politicians must pretend to love the great national poet and force themselves to memorize a few lines of the great national poet, or they wouldn't be taken seriously. We sentimentalize these countries. I'm not saying they're better or worse. They're different. Sometimes people sentimentalize Russia. They'll say, oh, Russians all love poetry. And oh, in the Soviet Union, they used to have these poetry readings with 40,000 people at a poetry reading. The government fostered certain poets. If Coca-Cola or Microsoft decided to advance the poetry of Chuck Harper or me or Louise Glick, there'd be 40,000, they'd be selling it at the cash register at the supermarket. It's part of the culture. In those Eastern European countries, if a driver is angry at another driver, he'll yell at him, "You have no culture." Not an American insult. We find other things to yell. In the absence of the single unifying folk culture, and in the absence of that social class where money, power, and culture overlap, which you'll find certain places in the United States. You could probably find a room in Princeton, New Jersey, where they overlapped. In the absence of those two things, we rely on schools and libraries to perform this vital function. And in this country, we have a great intellectual tradition epitomized at its best by the fact that we had a head of state who was a great writer. I think that Lincoln's only rival would be Marcus Aurelius. We had a head of state in this country who was a great writer. We're proud of that. Alas, we also have, also strong, an anti-intellectual tradition. It's often possible to exploit Americans' distrust of the mind and of the art, and to make hay, to make money or political gain out of it. And that, I won't draw elaborate lines for you at this point, that demonstrates, in my mind, why the work that Jay Phillips and Chuck Harper and Lee Regan and Jennifer Harris do in your community is not only praiseworthy, it's not just nice, it's also important. And we set a model for our children and our grandchildren when we indicate our respect for these things, and we should be grateful to these people who provide us with an institutional framework and a room and a place and an occasion to do these things. Frankly, there are times when I am kind of hard to get. And the fact that the Favorite Poem Project, which is my own improvising of a response to this, to the cultural analysis I've described to you, the fact that it was well embedded here and people had been doing it and knew about it, I'm a sucker for that. I will read poems to you, and I'll warn you that often I depart from the standard thing where somebody comes to a microphone or a podium and the person yaks for 50 minutes or an hour, alas, sometimes more. And then there's, well, now we'll have questions, we'll have 20 or 25 minutes of questions. I sometimes mix that up, where I might read to you now for 20 minutes, and then I might stop and invite questions and kind remarks. And there's a saying in the music business, we do requests. If it's not pretentious to assume anybody knows anything by me, I'd be happy to read a poem. You know, if it's not a poem that takes an hour to read, I've written some book-length poems, so I'd read part of it. Anyway, I would be grateful if somebody suggested something for me to read, and if you can't remember the title and you say, oh, it's the one where the people go to the beach or something, I'll try to help you out and figure out what it is. In short, I would like to make this informal as possible and as interlocutory as possible. So I'm warning you now that the point might come when I'll say that it is your turn. I'll read the first poem in my book, Jersey Rain. Samurai Song. Samurai Song. When I had no roof, I made audacity my roof. When I had no supper, my eyes dined. When I had no eyes, I listened. When I had no ears, I thought. When I had no thought, I waited. When I had no father, I made care my father. When I had no mother, I embraced order. When I had no friend, I made quiet my friend. When I had no enemy, I opposed my body. When I had no temple, I made my voice my temple. I have no priest. My tongue is my choir. When I have no means, fortune is my means. When I have nothing, death will be my fortune. Need is my tactic. Detachment is my strategy. When I had no lover, I courted my sleep.